It started with a dog. A woman named Christine Ross was walking her dog Ruka on a February morning in 2009. They were on the West Mesa, a stretch of dry, open land on the western edge of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was the kind of place people went to ride dirt bikes or just, get away from the city for a bit. It was empty, desolate. Ruka, off-leash, found something, a bone. It looked human. Christine thought so, anyway. It was a femur, long and bleached by the sun. She called the police. It was a good call. That single bone kicked off one of the biggest and most disturbing criminal investigations in the history of New Mexico. It led to the discovery of a serial killer's private graveyard. When police and forensic teams arrived, they started to search the area. The ground was hard-packed dirt and scrub brush. They didn't find just one bone. They found more. And more. It soon became clear this wasn't an ancient burial site. This was something recent. Something terrible. The work was slow. It was more like an archaeological dig than a typical crime scene. Investigators used shovels and brushes, carefully scraping away layers of dirt. They set up a grid system to map everything. Every bone fragment, every piece of evidence had to be documented. The wind on the mesa was relentless, blowing dust everywhere. The scale of the task was enormous. Over the next few weeks and months, the full horror revealed itself. They found the remains of one person. Then a second. Then a third. The number kept climbing. By the time they finished, they had unearthed the skeletal remains of 11 different women and one unborn child. They were all buried in shallow graves, scattered across a patch of desert that had been slated for a new housing development. The media gave the unknown killer a name, the West Mesa Bone Collector. It was a chilling, memorable title. But the real story wasn't about the monster. It was about the women he took. Who were they? As investigators identified the remains using dental records and DNA, a pattern emerged. These weren't random women from all walks of life. They were all connected in one way or another to a life of poverty, drug addiction, and sex work. They had lived on the margins of society, they were vulnerable, and someone had exploited that vulnerability in the most brutal way possible. Their names were Jamie Barela, Monica Candelaria, Victoria Chavez, Virginia Cloven, Syllannia Edwards, Cinnamon Elks, Doreen Marquez, Julie Nieto, Veronica Romero, Evelyn Salazar, and Michelle Valdez. Michelle was pregnant when she was killed. Let's talk about them. They deserve to be more than just a list of names. Jamie Barela was a cousin to Evelyn Salazar, another one of the victims. She went missing in 2004. Her family said she had a good heart but fell into a bad crowd. She struggled with drugs. When she disappeared, her family reported it, but it felt like no one was really looking. She was just another missing girl from the streets. Monica Candelaria was a mother of 3. She disappeared in 2003. She was only 22. Her family remembers her as funny and full of life before drugs took hold. She tried to get clean. She wanted to be a good mother. But the addiction was strong. She was last seen on a street known for prostitution. Victoria Chavez went missing in 2004. She was a young mother. Her family described her as a loving person who got lost. They never stopped looking for her. They put up flyers, they talked to them. But years went by with no answers. Just a painful, empty space where she used to be. Virginia Cloven was last seen in 2004. She was in her early 20s. Like the others, she had a drug problem and was known to work the streets to support her habit. Her story was tragically similar to the rest. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, and then she was gone. Syllannia Edwards was from Lawton, Oklahoma. She had moved to Albuquerque and fell into a difficult life. She was reported missing in 2003. She was a mother. Her family back home was devastated. They knew she was in trouble, but they never imagined this. Her case would later provide one of the most significant clues in the investigation. Cinnamon Elks was a teenager when she disappeared in 2004. She had run away from home, and she was a kid who got caught up in something she couldn't handle. Her youth makes her story even more heartbreaking. She was just starting her life. Doreen Marquez was a mother of 2. She was last seen in 2003. She struggled, but she was loved. Her family missed her deeply. For years, they held onto the hope that she was still out there somewhere, that one day she would come home. Julie Nieto also had children. She vanished in 2004. Her family said she was a kind person who made some bad choices. They never gave up hope. They kept her memory alive, telling her kids stories about their mother. Veronica Romero disappeared in 2004. She was 28. She had a family that loved her. They knew she was involved in a high-risk lifestyle, and they worried constantly. Their worst fears came true when her remains were identified. Evelyn Salazar was Jamie Barela's cousin. She was a young woman who disappeared in 2004. Her family lost 2 of their own to this killer. The grief was unimaginable. They had to bury 2 young women who should have had their whole lives ahead of them. And then there was Michelle Valdez. She was 22 when she vanished in 2004. She was 4 months pregnant. Her death meant the loss of 2 lives. She was trying to get her life together for her baby. She was excited about being a mother. The killer didn't just take her future, he took her child's too. These women all disappeared between 2001 and 2005. They all frequented a part of Albuquerque known as the International District, or what some people called the War Zone. It was an area known for drugs and prostitution. They were easy targets. When they went missing, their disappearances often weren't taken seriously at first. They were seen as runaways, or people who had just moved on. The system failed them. Their families tried to raise the alarm, but their voices were often ignored. The discovery of the bodies changed everything. Albuquerque now had to face the reality that a serial killer had been operating in their city for years, preying on its most vulnerable citizens. The police formed a massive task force called the 118th Street Homicide Investigation, named for the location of the gravesite. They were faced with an incredibly difficult case. The bodies were skeletons. There was no soft tissue, which meant no immediate cause of death could be determined. There was no DNA from the killer on the bones. There was no clothing, no jewelry, no personal items left in the graves. Nothing. The killer had been careful. He chose a remote location. He buried the bodies deep enough that they wouldn't be found easily, but not so deep that it would be a huge effort. He likely did it at night, under the cover of darkness. The police believed he was probably one person, someone who knew the West Mesa well. Someone who could move around without drawing attention. They had to work backward. They started by building a profile of the victims. They were all petite women. They all had a history with drugs and sex work. They all disappeared from the same general area of the city. This gave the police a profile of the killer's type. He targeted women he thought no one would miss. Women he could control. The investigation was a slow grind. Detectives re-interviewed family members. They talked to friends. They went back to the streets and talked to other sex workers, pimps, and drug dealers. They chased down hundreds of tips. Many of those tips led nowhere. The years that had passed made memories fuzzy. People had moved away. Some were dead, but a few names kept coming up. A few potential suspects began to emerge from the fog. One of the first major suspects was a man named Joseph Blea. He was already in prison for sexually assaulting multiple women, including a 13-year-old girl. Blea was known as the Roswell Ripper. He was a violent predator. He had lived in Albuquerque during the time the West Mesa victims disappeared. He frequented the same areas. He targeted vulnerable women. On paper, he looked like a strong possibility. But there were problems with the theory that Blea was the bone collector. Blea's crimes were violent and messy. He attacked his victims in public places, like parks. He left them alive, often badly beaten. The West Mesa killer was different. He was methodical. He was organized. He hid the bodies carefully. He didn't leave a mess. The two styles, the two signatures, just didn't seem to match. While police never officially cleared him, many investigators felt he wasn't their man. Another lead pointed to a mysterious photographer. Several women who worked the streets told police about a man who would offer them money to take pictures. He had a van. He would take them to remote locations, sometimes out on the West Mesa. He would pose them, sometimes in bondage-style photos. The stories were creepy. The women felt he was dangerous. They gave police a name, or at least a nickname, for this man. Some called him Freddy. Others knew him as Eric. Police looked into this. They found a man who fit the description. They searched his home and found photos of women, some of whom were prostitutes. But they couldn't directly link him to any of the 11 victims. There was no physical evidence. He denied any involvement in the murders. It was another promising lead that turned into a dead end. But the most compelling suspect, the one that many investigators believe was the West Mesa bone collector, was a man named Lorenzo Montoya. Montoya was a contractor. He built homes. He lived in a trailer not far from where the bodies were buried. He knew the area like the back of his hand. He had a history of violence against women, especially prostitutes. He was a brute. Women who knew him said he was controlling and sadistic. He would pick up sex workers, take them to his trailer, and abuse them. He threatened to kill them. He told one woman he had buried bodies before and could do it again. The biggest break in the case came from one of the victims herself, Syllannia Edwards. Police were able to trace her last known whereabouts through cell phone records. The records showed that just before she disappeared in 2003, her phone was used to call Lorenzo Montoya, and the phone call pinged off a cell tower that provided coverage for the exact area of the West Mesa where her body and the bodies of the other 10 women would eventually be found. It was a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. It placed a victim with a violent suspect in the location of the burial ground right around the time she went missing. Investigators dug deeper into Montoya's life. They found more and more disturbing stories. One woman came forward and told police that Montoya had strangled her and left her for dead. So she survived, but she was terrified of him. Others told similar stories of his rage and violence. He fit the profile of the killer perfectly. He had the means, the opportunity, and the disposition. But there was a huge problem. By the time the police had zeroed in on Lorenzo Montoya as their prime suspect, he was already dead. In 2006, 3 years before the bodies were found, Montoya got into an argument with a man. The man was the pimp of a prostitute Montoya had picked up. Montoya tried to kill the man in his own trailer. The man fought back, managed to get Montoya's gun, and shot and killed him. It was ruled a justifiable homicide, self-defense. Lorenzo Montoya died without ever facing justice for the crimes police believe he committed. And with his death, the chance to get a confession, to know for sure, died with him. There was another crucial piece of the puzzle that pointed to Montoya: the timeline. The women all disappeared between 2001 and 2005. Lorenzo Montoya died in 2006. After his death, the disappearances of this type of victim stopped. The pattern was broken. It was as if the predator had simply vanished. Many investigators believe that's because he was dead. So who was the West Mesa bone collector? The most likely answer is Lorenzo Montoya. The evidence, though circumstantial, is strong. He had a history of violence against the same type of women. He lived near the burial site. He was linked by a phone call to one of the victims at the site. And the killing stopped when he died. It all fits, but the case is still officially unsolved. No one has ever been charged with the murders of the 11 women and the unborn child. The Albuquerque Police Department keeps the case open. They say that until there is a definitive piece of evidence, like a DNA match, they cannot officially close it. They can't be 100% certain it was Montoya. There's always the possibility that someone else was involved. Maybe Montoya had a partner, or maybe it was someone else entirely. The lack of a final official answer is agonizing for the families of the victims. They've lived with this nightmare for years. First, their loved ones went missing. Then came the horrific discovery of the bones, and now they are left with a strong suspicion, but no legal certainty. There is no day in court. No trial, no conviction, just a cold case file and a gnawing sense of unfinished business. The community has tried to heal. On the West Mesa, not far from where the bodies were found, there is a memorial. It's called the West Mesa Victims Memorial Park. It's a quiet, reflective space. There are benches and plaques with the names of the women. It's a place to remember them not as victims of a monster, but as the people they were: mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. It's an attempt to give them back the dignity that was stolen from them. The story of the West Mesa bone collector is more than just a true crime tale. It's a story about how society treats its most vulnerable. These women were living on the edge. Their struggles with addiction and poverty made them invisible to many. When they vanished, the world didn't stop. The alarm bells didn't ring loud enough. It took the discovery of a mass grave for people to finally pay attention. And it's a stark reminder that predators hunt for those they believe no one will fight for. They look for the forgotten, the ignored, the people who have slipped through the cracks. The killer, whoever he was, counted on that. He counted on the fact that these women's lives were seen as less valuable. For years, he was right. The case also shows the frustrating reality of police work. You know, it's not like on television where every clue leads to another and the mystery is solved in an hour. Real-life investigations are slow, messy, and full of dead ends. Sometimes, even when you think you know who did it, you can't prove it. Sometimes the killer's dead before you even know his name. Today, the West Mesa is different. The city has grown up around the burial site. The housing development that was planned is now there. Their families live in homes built on land that once held a terrible secret. The empty, desolate landscape that the killer used for cover is gone. But the memory remains. The story is a scar on the city of Albuquerque. It's a ghost that haunts the West Mesa. The name Bone Collector still sends a chill down the spine of people who lived through that time. And for the families, the questions will always linger. They have a place to visit, a memorial to honor their dead. But they don't have justice. They have a very likely suspect, but no final answer. They are left to wonder about the final moments of their loved ones' lives. They are left to carry the weight of a crime that, in the eyes of the law, remains unsolved. The bones have been found and buried properly. But the case, and the pain, are far from laid to rest.